Savannah, Georgia, Willow Creek. I stood on the patio of the house I bought with my last savings, holding the same blue ceramic mug I'd carried through every stage of my adulthood, when the words cut through the warm evening air. "You don't live here anymore." Sabrina said it as if she were announcing the next course at a dinner party, her champagne glass catching the light. My son Ethan stood beside her, silent, rigid, unwilling to meet my eyes. Inside, on the marble counter, the insurance contract lay open. The bold letters stared up at me. Basic coverage, signed by Ethan Turner. And the number I had begged them not to touch, $4,860 a year, was crossed out in hard, impatient strokes. Guests laughed in the backyard. Music played. And yet somehow, I felt as if I were watching my own life being quietly erased. On their housewarming day, in the home I paid for, they pushed me out with a single sentence. For a long second, the world didn't move. Not the lights, not their faces, not the breath in my chest. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear what happened next, stay close. This truth only gets sharper from here. Subscribe so you don't miss the part where silence finally learns to speak back. My name is Margaret Turner, but almost everyone calls me Maggie. I am 74 years old, and for most of my life numbers have been my language. Interest rates, balance sheets, slow-growing funds that only reward patience, those were my companions for 32 years as a financial advisor at a local bank in Savannah. While the world rushed toward quick profit and shiny risks, I sat with ordinary people and taught them the quiet power of discipline. You can tell a lot about someone by the way they spend $20, I used to say. I believed that. I still do. I did not come from money. My father loaded trucks. My mother altered dresses at the kitchen table late into the night. When I married Samuel Turner, he liked to joke that I could stretch a single dollar until it snapped from exhaustion. We were careful, but not joyless. We saved for Christmas, for school, for the day when life might throw something heavy at us. I thought we had more time. We did not. Samuel's heart gave out in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, and suddenly I was a widow with a 10-year-old boy and a stack of bills. Ethan was my reason to get up in the morning. I learned how to breathe again by packing his school lunches, sewing badges on his scout uniform, and explaining homework at the small round table by the window. I also learned how to be harder with myself. No late payments. No unnecessary risk. No debt that I could not clear within a month. Every bonus at the bank, every tax refund, every careful dollar went into two places, Ethan's future and my retirement. Over time, that careful pile of money became something solid. Nothing extravagant, no yachts, no luxury cars, just a modest apartment fully paid off, a balanced portfolio, and a quiet promise to myself that when my joints grew stiff and my hands started to shake, I would not be a burden to anyone. I would have enough for my medication, my rent, my food, my small comforts. I did not want to be the old mother who needed rescuing. I wanted to be the old mother who could still help. Ethan grew from a skinny boy with mismatched socks into a tall man who tasted success and wanted more of it. He discovered that he had a good mind for technology and sales. He could talk anyone into anything, where I had always preferred to show people facts and let them choose. When he met Sabrina, she slid into our lives like someone who had always belonged there, polished nails, neat handwriting, a clever smile that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in marketing, which, as I understood it, was the art of convincing people to want what they did not truly need. From the beginning, Sabrina and Ethan formed a sharp little unit, ambitious, polished, hungry. They moved through restaurants and parties like they owned them, even when their bank accounts did not match their confidence. Ethan would laugh and say, "Mom, it's called manifesting. You act like you already have it. The universe catches up." I would smile, but inside I thought of compound interest and the years it took to grow anything real. The universe, in my experience, kept very detailed books. They knew I was careful with my money. They also knew that I was generous with them. When their first car broke down, I helped with the repairs. When Sabrina lost a job one winter, I quietly covered 3 months of their rent so they would not fall behind. When Lily, my granddaughter, was born with that soft tuft of dark hair and serious eyes, I opened a small education fund in her name. These were not sacrifices to me, they were extensions of love, expressed in the only way I truly trusted, through steadiness. But somewhere along the way, a shift happened. My help, once received with gratitude and awkward hugs, became an expectation. If something went wrong, they would say, "We'll talk to Mom. She'll know what to do." If a bill was higher than expected, there would be a light joke about Grandma's magic safety net. At first I was proud. They trusted me. They counted on me. Then, gradually, pride curdled into something heavier. From the beginning, Sabrina and Ethan moved as a tight little unit, ambitious, polished, always reaching. They loved expensive restaurants, weekend trips, the feeling of being important. Ethan called it manifesting. "You act like you already have it, Mom," he would say. "The rest will follow." I would nod, thinking of interest and ledgers that never lie. They were ambitious and they did work hard, but they hated limits. To them, my savings were not a lifetime of discipline. They were a shortcut, already half counted as theirs. I did not grasp this at once. It showed in small things, the quick look they shared when I mentioned my savings, the way thanks turned into expectation. Bit by bit I understood, in their minds, my money was already part of their future. And the cruelest part is that I helped them build that habit, one well-intentioned check at a time. I noticed the first crack long before the housewarming, though at the time I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a passing look, a moment of weariness on Ethan's face. Still, the memory stayed with me, the way a faint bruise announces trouble before the pain arrives. It happened on a warm March afternoon, when the three of us were visiting potential houses around Willow Creek. I remember the scent of cut grass drifting in through the open car window, and the soft weight of my scarf against my collarbone as I waited for them to join me on the sidewalk. Ethan approached first, his steps brisk, his phone still in his hand. I asked him if he liked the place we had just toured. He smiled, but something in his eyes tightened. "It's good, Mom," he said. "But maybe we should keep looking." I nodded, thinking he simply wanted something practical, something reliable. That was how I had raised him, caution before excitement, planning before impulse. But Sabrina's reaction erased that hope almost instantly. She stood in the entryway of the small beige house, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a line no wider than a thread. "It's cute, Maggie," she said, her voice smooth but hollow, "but it's not our level." She walked past me with the faintest whiff of perfume trailing behind her. I remember staring at the wooden banister, running my fingertips along its edge to ground myself. Her words were not loud, yet they created a distance I could feel physically, like a cold space opening between us. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was being sensitive. After all, everyone had preferences when choosing a home. Perhaps she simply wanted more space or a different layout. But that sentence, "our level," echoed inside me long after we drove away. It carried an assumption that unsettled me, a silent expectation that whatever they wanted, I would provide. It was as if the roles had shifted without my consent, and I had become the resource they were managing rather than the mother they cherished. The next house we toured was slightly larger, with tall windows and a bright kitchen. I watched them move through it like critics inspecting a stage set. Ethan tapped at his phone, likely checking listings for higher prices. Sabrina tested the softness of the carpet with her shoe and murmured something about resale value. I stood near the kitchen island, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and feeling strangely out of place, like a visitor tagging along rather than the person funding the entire search. When the realtor approached me discreetly to ask whether my budget was flexible, I felt the first real sting. I had told Ethan privately what I could afford and how much of my retirement would be left afterward. Yet here she was, gently hinting that he had already floated a higher number to her. I thanked her politely, but inside my chest something tightened, a small knot forming under my ribs. Later that evening, while we waited for our dinner reservation, I overheard Sabrina whispering to a friend on the phone. Her voice was light, almost playful. "She can afford more," she said. "She's just old-fashioned about money." A short pause followed, then a soft laugh. "Oh, she'll agree. She always does." I remember pretending to admire a framed photograph on the restaurant wall just to hide the flicker of hurt on my face. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the certainty behind them, the quiet confidence that my boundaries were elastic, something to stretch rather than respect. That was the first moment I realized the balance had shifted. I was no longer helping out of love, I was being depended on out of assumption. And assumptions, I knew from decades in the financial world, were the first step toward risk. Dangerous risk. I did not confront them that night. I simply folded my napkin, lifted my water glass, and reminded myself to breathe slowly. But something inside me shifted, a nearly imperceptible movement, like the first settling of a house before the cracks appear. And even then, I understood, small signs speak the loudest, if only we choose to listen. The tension grew the way storm clouds do, slowly, almost politely at first, until suddenly the whole sky is darker than you remember. After those early tours, Ethan and Sabrina sharpened their expectations with a confidence that startled me. What used to be suggestions became requirements, and what used to be gratitude turned into practiced entitlement. It began with neighborhoods. "This one feels too modest," Sabrina would say lightly, her hand brushing across a railing as though she were inspecting fabric. "We want Lily to be around families who value success." The implication hung there, this area was beneath them. Beneath what they imagined themselves to be. Then came the photos Ethan sent, houses priced well beyond the limit I had quietly set for myself. When I reminded him what I could afford without endangering my retirement, he replied, "Mom, you're thinking too small. It's a long-term investment. You should trust the process." I stared at the message, feeling an unexpected chill. I had spent my life advising clients against financial overreach, now my own son was urging me toward it. Sabrina's ideas intensified soon after. During a late lunch, she stirred her lemonade thoughtfully and said, "A pool is essential. Lily loves the water. It'll help her development." I mentioned several nearby community centers, but she smiled with gentle correction. "No, Maggie. We want quality. A private pool says stability." Stability, in her definition, always seemed to carry a price that someone else was expected to pay. From there, the upgrades arrived as steadily as the tide. High-end appliances, custom cabinets, imported countertops. Each email from Sabrina came with a cheerful subject line, "Vision for the kitchen," or "Dream flooring." But inside, every link represented thousands of dollars I had never agreed to spend. The exclamation points felt like small taps on a door she assumed I would always answer. But what unsettled me most wasn't their requests. It was their tone. Ethan's voice grew clipped when I asked practical questions. Sabrina's polite smile began to thin when I hesitated at costs. They no longer treated me as someone offering help. They treated me as someone failing to meet expectations. One afternoon, I drove by a house we were considering. I wanted to see it alone, without the weight of their commentary. As I walked around the quiet backyard, I heard Sabrina's voice drifting through an open window. "She can pay more," she said flatly. "She just acts cautious. She'll break eventually." The words hit me with the force of cold water. Break. As if I were an obstacle. A puzzle to solve. A wall they intended to lean on until it gave way. I stepped back from the window, my hand gripping the fence to steady myself. The wood felt solid, grounding, a reminder that not everything yielded under pressure. But inside me, something trembled, not from weakness, but from recognition. They weren't misreading me. They were counting on my silence. Later that day, Ethan called. "So," he began, too casually, "have you thought about stretching the budget a bit? Just for the down payment?" I told him gently but firmly that I had not. There was a pause, a long, heavy one. Then he said, "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for whom, I wondered. For me, Or for the plans they had already made with money that didn't belong to them? The following weeks felt like walking through a house with floors that creaked in new places each day. Small dismissals. Rushed answers. A growing coldness I couldn't ignore. And beneath it all, a quiet sense that something larger was building, pressure tightening like a wire, waiting for the moment it would finally snap. The night of the housewarming arrived with a softness that felt almost deceptive. Warm air drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of magnolia and grilled food from the backyard. Guests filled the rooms with pleasant chatter, glasses clinking, music humming beneath it all. I moved quietly through the house, watching people admire the furniture, the lighting, the new patio setup, items I had paid for, though no one seemed to know that. Or care. I had baked my lemon pie that morning, the same recipe Ethan loved as a child. I brought the dish into the kitchen and set it on the counter, planning to let it cool before slicing it. When I turned to leave, I heard laughter, a sharp, tinkling sound that didn't match the warmth in the room. Sabrina's voice followed, drifting from the pantry doorway. "She thinks she owns the place just because she paid for it," she said, each word dipped in casual cruelty, as if she were commenting on the weather. Someone chuckled softly. "She'll adjust," Sabrina added. "People her age should be grateful they're included at all." I froze. My hand tightened around the handle of the pie dish, the ceramic edge cool against my skin. I stepped back slightly, careful not to make a sound. Her tone wasn't irritated or emotional, it was confident. Certain. That was the part that pierced the deepest. I waited for Ethan to correct her. Defend me. Say something. Anything. But when he spoke, his voice held no discomfort, only tired agreement. "She just needs to understand boundaries," he murmured. "We can't have her acting like she still lives here." The words dropped like stones into the pit of my stomach. I stayed hidden as they walked out, their footsteps fading into the noise of the living room. When the door swung shut behind them, I turned back to the counter. That was when I saw it, the insurance contract lying open, the edges neatly aligned as if someone had been reviewing it just moments before. My eyes went straight to the middle of the page. Basic coverage, the header declared. And beneath it, in a bold, unwavering font, signed by Ethan Turner. My breath caught. I flipped through the pages, scanning line after line until I found the one number I dreaded. The extended coverage, $4,860 per year, had been scratched out. Not erased. Scratched. Hard, angry strokes of black ink. It felt like standing at the bottom of a well, the air thinning with every passing second. I had begged them not to lower the coverage. I had explained the risks, the vulnerabilities, the hidden issues that older homes often carried. I had offered to pay the difference myself. But they had crossed it out anyway. They had ignored every warning. Later, I would learn why. They had used the leftover money to buy a new patio set, the same one everyone was admiring outside as laughter drifted through the open door. I placed my fingertips on the ink, feeling the grooves where the pen had dug into the paper. A strange calm washed over me, not numbness, not shock, but recognition. This was the moment I had been moving toward without realizing it. Every dismissal, every sigh, every cold glance had been leading here. When I stepped out onto the patio, the lights above flickered softly, grazing the edges of the crowd. Sabrina stood at the center, glowing with attention, holding a champagne glass. Ethan stood beside her, comfortable and unbothered. She saw me before he did. Her smile didn't falter. She simply lifted her glass slightly and said, in a voice clear enough for the nearest guests to hear, "Maggie, you don't live here anymore." It was not a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration. The conversations around us did not stop, but I felt the air shift as if something had torn. Ethan didn't refute her. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look embarrassed. His silence was the deepest betrayal of all. I stood there with the night pressing against my skin, the noise of celebration buzzing faintly in my ears, and realized that I had finally reached the point where something inside me could no longer bend. Something had to break, and it wasn't going to be me. When the last of the laughter settled into the corners of the yard, I stepped back inside the house. The cool air brushed against my arms, and for a moment, I simply stood there, listening. Not to the voices outside, not to the clinking glasses, but to something quiet inside me. A sound like a wire pulled too tight. A warning that had long been whispering finally sharpened into clarity. I returned to the kitchen to retrieve my pie dish. The room was empty now, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint imprint of conversations that had wounded more deeply than I cared to show. My lemon pie sat untouched. The dish felt heavier than it should have when I lifted it, as if absorbing the weight of the night. I wrapped it in a towel, an old habit, and held it close to my chest. The contract still lay open on the counter. The black ink marks looked even harsher under the ceiling light. I stared at them, feeling that strange calm settling again. After decades of advising others to protect themselves, to listen to early signs, to never ignore what the numbers revealed, I had spent years ignoring my own warnings. I had told myself Ethan was overwhelmed. That Sabrina was adjusting. That families go through phases. I had repeated these excuses until they formed a soft cage around me, easy to sit in, difficult to leave. But tonight, something broke through. Not anger. Not outrage. Something colder. Cleaner. A knowledge that did not tremble. I set the dish on the passenger seat of my car and sat for a long moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. The street was lined with warm lights, the kind meant to make neighborhoods feel safe. Yet I felt no safety, only a thinning thread stretching between who I had been and who I could choose to be. I whispered into the stillness, I will never let them treat me like this again. The words surprised me, not because I said them, but because they felt true the moment they left my lips. No hesitation. No apology. As I drove home, the night air pressed gently through the cracked window, carrying the scent of jasmine and distant seawater. I kept thinking of Lily, her small hands, her straightforward questions, the way she looked at me without calculation. She was the only one who had never taken more than I offered. The only one who simply saw me. When I reached my apartment, I turned on the lamp by the entryway. The warm glow spread across the familiar space, my book stacked neatly, my scarf draped over the chair, my framed photo of Samuel smiling in his quiet way. This was my life. Simple. Honest. Built by my own hands. I placed the pie dish on the counter and rested both palms against the cool surface. Every detail of the evening replayed in my mind, but instead of pain intensifying, it loosened. I felt strangely steady, as though I had finally stepped into a room where the floor no longer shifted beneath me. Tomorrow, I would take action. The kind I had postponed for far too long. But tonight, I allowed myself the smallest breath of relief. The kind that comes when you stop pretending you don't see the truth. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a soft blanket. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, and beneath it, a quiet resolve strong enough to rebuild my world exactly the way I needed it to be. The next morning arrived with a gray, muted light that seeped through my curtains long before I opened my eyes. I lay awake for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the previous night settle into something firm inside my chest. Resolve. Not anger, not heartbreak, just a quiet, steady resolve that felt long overdue. I rose slowly, made my tea, and sat at the small table where I had once helped Ethan with homework. Now, the same wood grain held a different purpose. I pulled my planner toward me, the one I had kept faithfully for years. It smelled faintly of ink and lavender, and turning its pages steadied me. I wrote a list, short, firm, deliberate. Each item felt like a small boundary placed back where it once belonged. First, call my attorney. Second, change all financial access codes. Third, audit every shared account, every permission, every automatic payment that included Ethan's name. Fourth, update my will. By 9 o'clock, I had already completed the first. My attorney, Mr. Fletcher, answered with his usual calm voice. "Maggie, what can I do for you today?" he asked. I told him I needed an appointment immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. There was a pause, brief, respectful. Come in at 1, he said. We'll take care of everything. And for the first time in a long time, I believed someone. Next, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. My fingers trembled slightly at first, but the motion grew steadier with each click. I reviewed every detail, balances, alerts, shared authorizations. I saw small things I had once ignored, Ethan listed as a view-only contact on one account, a forgotten automatic transfer on another. Nothing disastrous, but each one represented a tiny door left unlocked. I closed them all. Then came the will. The document stared back at me from the screen, filled with names and instructions I had written years earlier. Back when I believed my son would always act with the same honesty I had tried to model. Back when every decision came from love, not caution. My pen hovered over the printed copy as I reviewed it. Slowly, deliberately, I crossed out Ethan's inheritance. I replaced it with Lily's name. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself, and her. She deserved something that wasn't built on pressure or expectation. Before leaving the apartment, I called Clara, the realtor who had helped them purchase the house. Her voice sounded bright, routine. I asked her for an honest assessment of the property's condition after the insurance downgrade. A pause stretched through the phone. Maggie, without the extended coverage, there's almost nothing the policy can support if structural issues appear. I thanked her gently. Then consider this my last involvement, I said. I won't be contributing another dollar. At 1 o'clock sharp, I sat in Mr. Fletcher's office. The blinds were half drawn, casting soft lines of shadow across the wooden desk. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, not the emotions, not the cruelty, just the facts. He nodded slowly. You've made wise choices, he said. This ensures your autonomy. Autonomy. The word felt like a hand placed on my back, steadying me. When I left his office, I felt lighter, not vindicated, not triumphant, but clear. I walked to my car with the sun warming my shoulders and understood that decisive action rarely feels dramatic. It feels like a key turning in the right lock after years of scraping at the wrong one. That evening, I placed all revised documents in a neat folder and set it on my dining table. The apartment felt different, still quiet, still familiar, but somehow larger, as though space had opened where old burdens once lived. Nothing external had changed. But inside me, something had been restored. Something simple. Something strong. My life, from this point forward, would move on my terms. 2 weeks after the housewarming, the first sign appeared in the driveway. A thin crack, barely noticeable at first, snaked across the concrete like a quiet warning. Ethan sent me a photo, accompanied by a brief message, "Is this normal?" I stared at the image for several seconds before placing the phone face down on the table. It was not my house. Not my responsibility. Not anymore. The following morning, the crack widened. The soil beneath the left corner of the property had begun to settle, slowly pulling the structure downward. A neighbor mentioned seeing workers pacing around the yard, their heads bent toward clipboards, their expressions uneasy. By the end of the week, the first wall inside had developed a subtle but unmistakable shift, a seam forming where the plaster had once been smooth. Sabrina called me then. Her voice, once polished and confident, carried a thin edge of irritation. "Maggie, something is wrong with the house," she said. "We need you to come look at it." I told her gently, "You have insurance. Contact them." A long silence followed. Then, flatly, "Right." She ended the call. The insurance inspector arrived 2 days later. His report was clinical, concise, and devastating. The structural issues were extensive, pre-existing vulnerabilities that required immediate and costly intervention. When he asked for the extended policy, Ethan hesitated. Sabrina stepped forward, her cheeks flushed. "We didn't take it," she admitted. The inspector nodded slowly. then there's little we can do. Basic coverage won't support structural failure. Their minimal policy offered nothing. No repairs. No compensation. No safety net. In the days that followed, the house continued to sink. The patio shifted. The back door no longer closed properly. Even the staircase began to creak under uneven pressure. What had once been their prized symbol of success transformed into a burden too heavy for them to carry. They tried blaming the construction company. Then the inspector. Then the weather. Eventually, inevitably, the blame turned toward me. Ethan showed up at my apartment one evening, looking worn, his shirt wrinkled, his voice tight with desperation. "Mom," he said, "we need help. We can't live there. We need a place to stay. Maybe you could sell this place, and we could all." "No," I said softly, firmly. A boundary as clear as a closed door. He blinked, stunned. He wasn't used to hearing that word from me. "But Mom, we're family." "We are," I replied. "And families respect each other's limits." Sabrina came the next day. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You can't just leave us like this," she snapped. "You helped create this situation by buying that house in the first place." Her eyes were sharp, accusatory. I felt a flicker of sadness, not for her anger, but for the person she had chosen to become. "You made your choices," I said quietly. "And now you must handle the consequences." The city inspector soon declared the house unsafe for occupancy. They were forced to vacate within 48 hours. Neighbors watched from their porches as Ethan and Sabrina carried boxes to their car, their movements hurried and tense. Lily clung to a stuffed rabbit, looking confused and small. I watched from my window, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with a kind of solemn acceptance. Choices always lead somewhere. These had led them here. They called me again that night, pleading, bargaining, insisting I reconsider. I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I allowed silence to protect me. Actions have consequences. And this time, the consequences were theirs to carry. After the chaos surrounding the house settled into its natural end, my life grew quiet in a way that felt healing rather than lonely. It had been years since I had woken to a morning untouched by someone else's expectations. For weeks, I let myself move slowly, watering my plants, reading by the window, listening to the hum of my old refrigerator. It felt like rediscovering a language I had once been fluent in, the language of my own company. The shift truly began the afternoon I met Sam Whitmore again. I'd known him for years in passing. We attended the same community meetings, exchanged brief conversations about weather or book recommendations. But this time, he found me sitting on a bench outside the library, a novel resting unopened in my lap. "You look like someone who's finally catching her breath," he said gently. I smiled, surprised at how easily the truth rose to the surface. "I think I am," I answered. Sam was a widower, quiet in a steady way that felt familiar. No rush, no demands, no strain behind his words. When he invited me for coffee a few days later, I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't romance I sought, just companionship free of pressure. Yet as we talked, something warm unfolded. He asked questions not to pry, but to understand. He listened the way people listen when they value what is being shared. It was Sam who suggested a short trip to the Florida coast. "Just a weekend," he said. "Somewhere the only decisions are where to walk and what to eat." The simplicity of it felt like a balm. We rented a small beach house, nothing grand, nothing excessive. White walls, a creaky porch, a view of the tide rolling in gentle rhythm. At night, the ocean's breath filled the room like a lullaby. Lily visited during the summer, and I could see her relief the moment she stepped through my door. Her shoulders softened, her voice brightened. We spent our days collecting shells, drinking lemonade on the porch, reading children's stories she chose from the library. She never asked about the house or her parents' anger. She simply sat beside me, her small hand wrapped around mine as if it had always belonged there. One afternoon, she pointed at the waves and said, "Grandma, it's peaceful here." It struck me how rarely I had heard that word spoken sincerely in my family. Peace. Not performance. Not expectation. Just quiet truth. Slowly, something in me rebuilt. I bought new dresses, soft fabrics in gentle colors. I reorganized my living space, removing items that carried old tension and replacing them with things that felt like me: fresh flowers, a new reading lamp, a framed map of all the places I still wanted to visit. I began attending writing circles at the local community center, sharing small stories that had lived inside me for years. Sam and I developed a routine that felt both natural and nourishing: morning walks, simple dinners, conversations that meandered through memories and hopes. There was no rush to define anything, no pressure to become anything more than two people who enjoyed each other's presence. In that gentle companionship, I rediscovered parts of myself I had tucked away long ago. My life had narrowed for so many years around the needs of others. Now it widened again, like a window finally opened after a long winter. I no longer spent my days bracing for the next demand, the next dismissal. Instead, I greeted each morning with a quiet sense of possibility. I had not sought a new beginning, but it found me nevertheless. And as I watched the tide roll in one evening, the sky blushing golden lavender, I realized something simple and profound: peace is not given. It is claimed. And at 74, I had finally claimed mine. I used to sit awake at night asking myself the same question over and over: why did they do this to me? I searched for reasons the way people search for lost keys, frantically, believing that if I just looked hard enough, the answer would make the pain smaller. But the truth arrived slowly, the way morning light fills a quiet room. It was never about the house, or the money, or even the policy they crossed out. It was about the years I spent giving without asking anything in return. The years I mistook silence for harmony. The years I smoothed over disrespect, convinced that patience would fix what clarity should have addressed. Now, when the question rises, I meet it gently: why did I allow it for so long? And I answer myself with honesty I once reserved only for clients at the bank. Because love can make you generous, and fear of losing that love can make you small. But I am not small anymore. My life is mine again, steady, quiet, built on choices I make with clear eyes. I have people who value me for more than what I provide. I wake to peace instead of tension. I speak without waiting for permission. If this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear more truths, where silence becomes strength, and women like me finally learn that choosing ourselves is not selfish, it is necessary.